I want to thank our sponsor, Planet Ford. Planet Ford has always been a proud supporter of law enforcement in the community, providing customer service and fleet management, sales, and service. If you're looking for that personal quality service, contact Planet Ford in Spring or online at planetford.com. Facing law enforcement, forensic, and crime scene investigations. Joining us today on Crime Scene Today, I have Joe Manz again from the Fire Marshal's Office and Bomb Squad, explosion expert in dealing with scenes that deal with explosive stuff. And today he brought up an interesting topic that I thought would be great to explore, is the use of canines and their roles in bomb squads, the Fire Marshal's Office, and their investigations. So, Joe, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan.
So you sort of brought up this topic, and I think it's interesting to sort of discuss the many roles that we don't always think about. We mainly think, as far as in law enforcement, general uses. When we think of canines, we think of those that are searching down escaped prisoners and bite dogs running in, getting a person with a warrant stuff. But there's so many different uses for them. And if you could just sort of go into how you got involved in this and sort of the uses that y'all use them for at the fire marshals and explosives and those type of things.
Sure. So with the Montgomery County Fire Marshal's Office, we have explosive detection canines and accelerant canines. Two of our current two canines are from ATF, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And then we have another explosive canine, which was from a private vendor, which was K-9 out of North Carolina. I started in the canine world in 2013, the end of 2012, 2013. So we had received an invitation from ATF basically stating that the military was trying to reassign explosive canines that were in current inventory, more or less, with the Marine Corps. And they wanted to know if we wanted to go basically pick out a canine and bring it home and then schedule training. So
these were previously dogs being used by the Marines in Afghanistan deployment and Middle East and all the, I guess, the war efforts and whatnot in detecting explosives over there.
That's correct. So after September 11th, they started their ground operations in the Middle East. And as they started ramping up, they started to realize that the enemy was basically using high explosives, military ordnance and military explosives against our soldiers, as far as improvised explosive devices. And, you hear on the news, they talk about IEDs, soldiers getting hit by IEDs. So the military began to ramp up this program in overtime. And they started sending Marines to train with these dogs and get them on the ground in the Middle East. So when 2007, 2008, from my understanding, was pretty much the really hard and heavy fighting that was going on over there. And so around 2010, 2011, they started getting a grip on what was happening in the Middle East. And so they would use these dogs to clear roads, clear, convoy paths, clear buildings, things like that. They had two different types of explosive dogs. One was the TED dog, the tactical explosive detecting dog. And those are pretty much just, the aggressive bite dogs that also, detect explosive odor as well. And then they had just the regular odor detecting dogs, which are typically your Labradors. And so when these dogs became surplus, me and one of my coworkers, we went to Southern Pines, North Carolina, to K2's kennels, which was just phenomenal. They've got a really remarkable setup there as far as kennels and training and everything else. And so they pretty much brought the dogs out. We watched the dogs work. And at the end of the day, we pick a dog. And if it wasn't already picked, more or less, it was ours. So we went through that process. They have a full discharge program, just like a soldier. When a soldier discharges from the military, the canines do the same thing. So they, went for a full physical. The dogs were taken over to Fort Bragg, were examined by military vets. They got the green light to be reassigned to law enforcement. So the second day I was there, they gave us a day of training, and basically it is the hand commands, things like that. Now, mind you, I'd never been a canine handler before. I've owned dogs all my life, but, never having worked a dog and understanding a dog's behavior, understanding their needs, understanding how they work, it can get a little overwhelming. So I ended up going back.
And you bring up a good point because these dogs are working. These are work dogs. These aren't pets. They're trained to work, and that is a different environment.
Well, so one of the things that in my opinion, needs to be cleared up in the public. Everybody looks at your dog, and they'll ask you, "Is that a service dog?" No, he's not a service dog. He is a police working dog. Military working dogs. There's a big difference there. Now, granted, there are some phenomenal programs out there for service dogs. I've seen some of those dogs, and it's just amazing the things these dogs can do. But they are different. They're not comfort dogs. They're not any of that. And I think the main thing you take away from the training is they're not humans. They speak a different language. They learn differently. They understand differently. And they know what they're doing. You have to learn to read them and understand what it is that they're showing you. And that's, every person is different. Well, so is every canine. When Echo, my first dog, the dog I got from K2, when I went to, let me rephrase that. The first dog I got from K2, her name was Jet, and she was a 4-year-old black lab, high-speed dog. What set her apart was that she was remote operated. So I could use a whistle and hand commands just like a duck dog, and send that dog downrange, having safe separation. And the dog would search whatever it was I wanted the dog to search. And then I could recall it, bring it home. If a dog, if I had a car sitting out somewhere 100 yards away, I could send that dog downrange 100 yards. That dog would search that car and basically tell me if it detected odor or not, which is really impressive, the amount of training and everything that goes into making those dogs that way. And on top of their, explosive odor detection is just phenomenal. The handlers have to learn, how to make the dog do as they're asked. And that's a fine line with dogs. Some days they're in great moods, and some days they really don't want to do this, just like us when we get up every day. For the most part, I've been very fortunate. So I went for my full 30 days of training back at K2 in April of 2013. And halfway through my training, Jet just shut down. I mean, just completely shut down. She did not, she didn't want to search. You could just tell it wasn't in her heart anymore. And when it was stuff she wanted to do, it was great. But if it's stuff I wanted her to do, not so much. So we were struggling, and I was going into remedial training. We were trying to do everything we could to get this dog's drive to come back. And we were doing an outdoor exercise where we were sending the dogs downrange to search cars. And I sent Jet downrange. She goes down. I see the change in behavior. In other words, I know she's on odor, but she just wanders off. She didn't go to the source like she was supposed to. So then I called her back, and I sent her back downrange again a second time. This time she goes downrange. She sniffs out the car. She alerts, which with the military working dogs would be to lay down and stare at me. And they're supposed to hold that for up to 2 minutes. Well, she held it for maybe 5 seconds and took off chasing a grasshopper. So, her attention span, her focus wasn't there. So I called her back a third time. This time I'm frustrated. She's frustrated. She's ticked off because in her mind, she's already alerted to odor twice and
hasn't shown you twice where it's at.
Yeah, and she hasn't been paid for it. So the third time I send her downrange, she goes down, she goes up to that car, she jumps through the window of the car, goes into the passenger seat, grabs the explosive, which is a 5-pound bag of ammonium nitrate, comes back out of the car, looks at me, shakes it, and drops it. And my instructor just started dying laughing. He goes, "Son, if a dog could give you the finger, that's what she just did." He goes, "But unfortunately, she's now disqualified from working with explosives ever again. She is now aggressed on the odor, and that can't ever happen." So in that, 2-minute time frame, she retired out. So I still had a week of school to go, and I pretty much went back to the hotel, started packing all my stuff, and ready to head back to Houston. And I was stopped in the next morning just to say goodbye to everybody. And one of the majors from the Marine Corps, who I had met numerous times, he come up and he goes, "Hey, I heard about Jet." He goes, "I am so sorry." He goes, "They're just like people. Sometimes they just wake up and don't want to do this anymore." And he says, that happens a lot. He says, "If you would like to pick out another dog, we have some more surplus dogs that are here, and you'll get the pick of them." So, the only caveat to that is they can't take Jet back. So Jet has to come home. So I made a phone call to my wife. I said, "Hey, this is what just happened. I have the option to get another dog, but I have to keep Jet. What's your opinion?" And she was like, "Well, okay." So that would have meant we would have had 4 dogs at home, 2 Australian Shepherds and 2 high-speed Labradors. And so that kind of changes the dynamic, at your house as well. So anyway, I went ahead and came back and I told the major, I said, "Yep, let's do it." And so he put me out with a trainer. I got to watch 3 dogs work. I got to work all 3 dogs. And then at the end of the day, I just had to pick a dog to be it. But I pretty much knew her name was Echo, and she was a, little 60-pound black lab. And she and I we hit it off immediately. We bonded immediately. And it was so easy because we clicked. A lot of times I didn't even have to tell her what it is that I wanted. She just knew. based on the environment or the scenario that we were in. So it made things very easy for me to, have a dog that just understood. So we went through our training, our certification, all of that. Now, when I get into start talking about things like training, there is just so much that you have to learn. You get into the different types of explosives, and then you start getting into vapor pressures of explosives when, basically your chemistry of pyrotechnics. You have commercial explosives, then you also have military explosives. And very, very seldom do you see the military explosives, in the civilian world, but it's not to say it's not there. So we trained, on just about everything, RDX, TNT, PETN, dynamite, all of your powders. And then a lot of stuff such as, ammonium nitrate. And those are all your staples. And pretty much anything that you're going to find with ease of access to make an IED in the civilian world, we're training on it. And you have to understand.
So now as far as, you went up there and they trained you basically how to handle the dog. So what's the next step? You say there's a lot of training and stuff, but is that where you have to travel back up there for that? This is what happens at home. This is what you're regularly doing. What's that part of training like?
So when we were training at K2 at the kennel facility, we would go to different types of facilities, just exposing the dogs to different environments, and then giving them different explosive odors. So I can have a warehouse and I can put a pound of ammonium nitrate in that warehouse, and the dog will go round and round looking for it, because that vapor is not as dense. It's not as heavy. Whereas you could change it out and then put, a heavier odor in there, such as your military stuff, your C4s and stuff. And the dogs will pick that up faster. So they teach us where to put that dog to be most productive. So when you walk in, even the subtle stuff that you don't even pay attention to, first thing you do is you walk in and you start trying to feel where the air currents are. Is there a fan running? Is there, AC systems running? Things like that. And you're looking for those air currents to see where your odor is going to be pooling. And typically we'll start off in a corner because an odor is always going to push to a corner. And once a dog can get in that odor, they can usually track it right back to the source. But it's amazing to watch them work. Echo, for me, gosh, that girl, she made life so easy for me because she was self-motivated, self-thinker. She also had poise and was very precise. She was detailed in her search, and, she just took her time. One of the things that we do in our training is that you teach them, every time we go out and train, they always win. I don't ever take the dogs out, go training or doing any type of search where they don't win, because I don't want that to be in their head that, I'm going to go out, I'm going to do all of this work and not be rewarded for it. So, even on a true operation, we go in, we search a building, say we have a bomb threat, we search a building, we will put down what we call drop hides along the way, in a corridor, or in a, just somewhere in that building, like in a restroom or something. We'll hide something that the dog can find. So it keeps the dog's head back in that game, things like that. Anyway, I was getting off track. So anyway, the training that I got from K2 was pretty standard. And when I say standard, meaning I got the same training our soldiers got. It was really good training. they're not going to give you a dog and no owner's manual. So you have to, understand the quirks. And these instructors, the guys that teach this stuff, they all know their stuff. And they can look from dog to dog, and they can see that change in behavior. They can see the, when the dog goes into odor, things like that. When you're the handler and you're that close to your dog, a lot of times you miss it. And you have other guys observing, and they'll say, yeah, she was in odor, back here in this room, and you pulled her off, that sort of stuff. And it's like, really? So you learn to pay attention more and more to how the dog is behaving. Echo was like a poker player. She was real stoic. She, her change of behavior was real subtle. My current dog, Camp, ATF K-9, he's like a Tasmanian devil. And, going from, a Cadillac to this little dog who bounces all over the place, and it's just, he's ready to go, high strung. Sometimes I wonder why I even did this to myself. Going from a Cadillac dog to this was, kind of a big shock to me, because Echo made my life easy. And then when I got to ATF, Echo retired in 2018. She had torn her CCL in her back leg, which is like an ACL in a human, and required surgery. Basically put a titanium plate in her knee. And, she could have quality life. She just can't be, a working dog anymore. So the opportunity came up to get one of the canines from ATF. And ATF has got a world-class program. Those guys that are over there, just impressive. I'm just impressive. It's amazing just how small a community it is, because those trainers up there know so many other trainers, across the nation and pretty much all over the world. So, when I told them what my experience was, they knew who my trainers were at K2. It's just a small world, especially for the trainer side of it. So when Echo retired, I went to ATF for 10 weeks, and that was a long run. I went to Front Royal, Virginia, to their National K-9 Training Center, and that is state of the art. Those guys are, the care that each of those dogs get is incredible. The veterinary care, the evaluations, the things that they look at with these dogs is just unbelievable. But they put so much money into these dogs. They got to make sure that these dogs are going to cut it. And I can understand that. So my dog, my current dog, Camp, he came from Auburn University. Auburn's got a Canine Performance Science Institute where they have geneticists that breed the super dogs. And they will take those dogs, evaluate them, and then, basically put them out to the market, whether it's ATF, Secret Service, any, Air Force, Marine Corps, anybody that needs, these high-end dogs are eligible to buy them. So ATF also gets their dogs from another vendor is called Puppies Behind Bars. And they have prison inmates on the East Coast who basically take these dogs in, and they are taught and they are trained how to train dogs. And from the basics to potty training them to doing, all the way up to advanced chores. A lot of those are for our PTSD soldiers that come home and they need assistance. These dogs can do some amazing stuff. Open a drawer, take out a pair of socks kind of stuff. And it's just phenomenal. So when they have excess dogs, those dogs all get trained, and then they end up going to places like ATF. And those dogs are just so accustomed to everything. They're so social, desensitized to, our environment, to our, different conditions that they would come across. Last December, I got called out to go to TDC to do a search. They had a threat in one of the prisons, and, they requested a canine, and I went up there and I was thinking, he's never been in a prison before. I need to get one of those prison dogs over here who'd feel right at home, going into the prison. But as far as, the school, the training, they start the dogs, they imprint them on their odors, and about 3 weeks before I get there. My dog is food reward, where Echo was play reward. So the difference is when they alert on odor, the play reward gets a Kong or a tennis ball, something like that to play with. Whereas the food reward means that when they alert on explosive odor, that's when they eat. So that was a big, big change in dynamic for me, because my current dog, Camp, he's food reward. So he has to find explosives every day in order to eat. So thankfully, I live on 5 acres, so I can plant explosives. I can plant, training aids on my property, things like that. And then I let him go to work to go find it. We'll do sniffer tins. We'll do cans, paint cans, stuff like that with odor in it. It's a lot more time consuming. But also, too, he is on odor every day, and I keep him on staple odors. So, the ideology or the methodology behind it, I don't know if there are pluses and minuses, pros and cons. Having worked both dogs, I will say the food reward dog is probably, a little more driven to succeed because he knows he's going to eat. But there again, too, my dog will eat everything under the sun and doesn't even chew. So I don't know if it's, he just likes to eat or not. So,
well, it puts a dedication on the handler then that, there's not a day off from this.
Correct. Yeah.
Obviously, if the dog's going to eat every day, that means he works every day. It means you're not off. This is a everyday thing that y'all are training and working.
That's correct. With the food reward dog, yes. When I had the play reward, when I had Echo, Saturday morning, you wake up, you slam a bowl of food down, you go back to bed, you're good. If it's pouring down rain, if it's flooding, if I'm working overtime, if, all the crazy stuff that, law enforcement throws at you, I could just slam down a bowl of food and say, here you go. Well, having the food reward dog, that's changed my dynamic. If you're at home sick, if you are, storming, flooding, whatever's going on outside, the dog still has to work. And so that was the hardest part to get adjusted to, but now it's become routine. And so one of the things I do is I change up the times that we eat, when we work. I don't let him get on a schedule to say, it's 4:00, it's time to eat. So let's go do some stuff, because we may end up getting called out in the middle of the day or in the morning or at night. So I have to keep those feedings random for him. He can't be on a set schedule. Otherwise, when he's hungry, he'll come get me, say, hey, it's time to go to work. I'm ready to eat. So, and it's not to say that
with how much time and obviously investment, I mean, for many people, maybe from K2, from the training, from ATF, and then obviously in you, about what is the average time span that a dog is used or useful?
Well, that is also dependent on the dog itself. I know a lot of agencies look to get 5 years. It's not unheard of for a dog to go 10 or better. Echo went 10 years. But 10 years was including her military time. She passed away last August. As a matter of fact, the day I came home with camp, when I went to introduce the two dogs, I, had it, the people watching her bring them up to our fairgrounds. I wanted the two dogs to meet on neutral ground and let them get accustomed, let them play, let them do whatever they were going to do. And within 2 minutes of seeing Echo for the first time in 12 weeks, I knew something was really wrong. I started to pet her. I could see that no spark in her eyes. It's like, look, we got to go to the vet right now. And they started freaking out. They were like, what are you talking about? I said, we got to go to the vet. She's dying. And they started panicking and freaking out. I said, we got to go now. So just knowing her, being my everyday partner for 7 years, I know my dog. And, right. I knew her inside and out, so to speak. And so we rushed to the vet. Sure enough, she had a mass that was in her chest, and they couldn't see through it with their x-ray or with their CAT scan. So I left her there overnight. Surgeon called me in the morning, says, yeah, she's got a huge mass in there. We don't know what it is. He said, the only way to do it is to go in and take a look. And, at that point, she's retired, started looking at stuff like finances and things like that.
Sure.
Just to go in was $6,000. And so I told him, I was like, you know what, just do it. I had a long conversation with him. He's the same doctor that did her leg surgery. And we got to become friends. And so when I asked him, I said, if it was your dog, what would you do? And he said, do the surgery. If she's going to have any chance at all, do the surgery. And I said, no, let's do it. So he called me back about an hour and a half later, said that he removed a tumor the size of a volleyball off of her spleen. Took her spleen, took all of that. So she, for the most part, was all of her organs were being compressed by this tumor. And, she wasn't getting a strong heartbeat. She wasn't getting nutrition because she wasn't eating right. And he pretty much said she was within about 48 hours of just collapsing and dying. So I don't know, just my timing coming home was coincidental or not. But anyway, we went through a month of healing, recovery. Biopsy came back as she was positive for hemangiosarcoma, which is a very prevalent cancer in dogs, especially Labradors, your Shepherds, your Malinois. I didn't realize it. I'd been a K-9 handler 7 years and never heard that word before. So, it's something that they can check for. And one of the vets even suggested that when they turn 5, just have their spleen removed. And I thought, that's interesting, It was
a little aggressive.
Well, right. That's typically where this tends to start, is in the spleen. So once she was strong enough, I elected to do chemotherapy. And we did chemo. We did, a dog can only have a maximum amount of chemotherapy in a lifetime. And so she had the max that she could do. And she had great quality of life. She made it just 3 days shy of a year from her surgery. So, yeah, it cost me a lot of money out of pocket, but I got another year with her, and it was quality time with her. It wasn't like she was laying around moping. She was still 3 days a week. I'd still take her to work. I'd load both dogs in the kennel, and she just had free reign. When I brought Camp out to feed him, I'd put her on odor. And, it was so funny because she would blow his doors off. And, it's just, you take that 10-year patrol officer and then you put that, 1 month rookie in with him.
Right.
You could see the difference in the two dogs. But she was also helpful in teaching him stuff that I think would have taken me longer to teach. Where to be productive on odors, because he followed her. A lot of times I'd let both dogs out at the same time looking for the same odor. And he would see her change in behavior and see that she was on odor. And he started to mimic what it was she was doing to be successful, to be paid. So, but at the same time, when she'd alert on the odor, he'd go and jump right in front of her, push her out of the way and say, "Hey, I got it." That sort of stuff, just the rivalry. But,
Well, we've talked as far as the training and getting them and sort of what they're trained on. So how often are these dogs used? I mean, is this something that I know you train every day and they get, but I mean, how often are they called out? I mean, how beneficial to a community is that these dogs are there? What are they doing on a regular basis?
Well, so we have a really good group of explosive canine handlers here in Montgomery County. And we try to train once a week together at a different venue. But since, February, since the whole coronavirus stuff, most of it has been with one of the school district police departments, because they have the access to the warehouses, to the schools, to the offices, to that sort of stuff. So since the coronavirus, we haven't been able to, the schools have been shut down, locked up, and we haven't had access to them. But we still do, training amongst ourselves, or a couple of us will get together and we'll take off. The one thing that makes camp different, very much different than Echo, is that ATF also imprints them and trains them on firearms residue. So camp can find shell casings. Camp can find fired guns. So that's, one of the things he's not only trained in, but he's certified in. And once a year, when we go for recertification, that's, we got to go find a gun. There's going to be a gun search somewhere. And so when you ask about how do we get called out, things like that, we do a lot of preemptive stuff, like, our concert venues, schools, things like that, on routine basis. Before performances, Ironman, all of our big events, the marathons, and we also go down. We'll assist Houston. Houston will come up here, assist us. So we do a lot of that sort of work. Now, actual true call outs, hey, we need a dog, for a bomb threat. We'll probably do one of those a quarter. But here, lately, my bread and butter has been, finding guns and finding shell casings and stuff like that. We had a shooting in a park down in the Woodlands, and, they couldn't find the shell casings. So I just happened to be a mile from there and said, hey, I can come over. So I got over there and work with the detectives and the CSI, made sure that everything that was known was already picked up. All of that stuff gets tagged, identified, and then removed so that the dog's not finding stuff they already found. So yeah, I put him in there, and he happened to find, a missing 22 shell casing from that shooting. So it helped. Him finding that shell casing helped solidify what the witness heard. The witness heard, X amount of gunshots, and they recovered, all but the one, that sort of thing. So we got all of the shell casings. But, we've been on searches before where we had an ag robbery, and the suspect fired at his victim a couple of times, took off on foot with a rifle. He hid the rifle just a short way from the scene in a wooded area, and then came back about an hour later and retrieved the rifle in a vehicle. So they call us out. I get out there, get on the ground. It's 100 degrees out. It is just miserable for me and the dog. And so I put the dog out, and we started looking, and he went right up to that tree, and he sniffed the base of the tree, got his feet up on the tree like he wanted to climb in it, and then he just alerts. And I'm like, there's no gun here, because I've got 20 officers all standing around watching him work, and I just got an alert on nothing. And so I call him off. We take off. I put him back in another area, and he starts working his way right back to that same tree again. He goes back. He sits at that tree. And I'm like, all right, I'm not quite sure what's happening here, but, there's odor here. There's something here. So we ended up loading up in the car, or loading up in the truck, and going to another location about a quarter mile away. And, just this search area was just huge. So while we're finishing up, we got a witness drive up in a car, and she asked us, she said, "Did y'all find that gun?" I said, "No, we didn't find the gun." She goes, "You're right there." She goes, "It's right there by that tree." She goes, "He put that gun down, and, he came back later on." She goes, "I think he got it and left." Well, sure enough, the dog was alerting on the residue that was left behind from that gun. That's pretty much, the gun was laying there in that area for an hour, and the dog picked up on it. So I thought, oh, wow. So I ended up putting the dog back in the truck, and we took off and went back over there. He went back over and alerted on that tree again. And this time I paid him, I fed him, so told him good boy. He was telling me what he was smelling all the time. I just didn't realize it at the time. I don't know what
you
it
talked
was
about as far as finding firearms and finding the shell casings. What about the actual projectile? I mean, like being in the ground or nearby. Is there enough residue still on that they would find that, or is there not enough from it burning up from being fired, or the difference between that?
It's subjective. So I would do my own tests. When I say do my own tests, I would go out in my pasture and I would shoot into a tree out of 22, and I would shoot into a tree.
Right.
It was, a down tree laying out in the pasture. I'd fire one shot, and then I'd move over about 4 feet and I'd fire another shot. I'd let it sit overnight, and I brought both dogs out, when Echo was still with me. Echo, in the search, she would locate the shell casings in the tall grass. Camp would not, but Camp alerted on both bullet entry points into the tree, where Echo did not. So dealing with a 22, you've got very little powder to begin with. So,
right.
You've got to make sure you put them in very productive areas, because you'll spend all of their energy and not be productive, not find what it is you're looking for. And, with camp, he got on those entry points, and there was still enough powder residue. So I haven't specifically gone looking for a bullet, but I know if there's odor there, they can do it. One thing that I was informed about when I was at ATF is that the DC sniper they had back in the 90s, one of his hiding spots where he fired from one of his concealed spots, one of the ATF K-9s had actually gone to that area and alerted to that point. And they were able to take samples and find gunshot residue from his AR on a brick wall. So that was one of his hiding spots. And, pretty much they drew out the trajectory and saw where he was hiding when he fired the shots based on the canine alert. So I thought that was really interesting. So can they do it? Yes. But it's something that has to be taught. They're not just going to do it instinctively, And from the best information I got during my training was really they don't know exactly what it is they're alerting on. What chemical component in explosives and drugs in, they have, the electronics dogs. They've got dogs that are detecting currency. They have dogs that are finding contraband fruits and vegetables at the airport. A lot of the dogs that wash out of the bomb program are re-imprinted and are sold to hotels to find bed bugs. So, they don't know exactly what it is that they're, which chemical they're detecting, but they know it's consistent enough to say, yeah, he knows this odor. And how it was explained to me was if you walk into your house, you can smell somebody cooking beef stew. Beef stew based on, how it smells. Well, when the dog walks in, the dog doesn't smell beef stew. The dog smells each one of those ingredients completely independent of each other. So you can have the beef stew, but as long as your major components, your broth, your stock, the major components of the stew is there, the dog will detect it, even though there's variations to the recipe. You can add stuff and remove stuff, but as long as the base stock is still there, they'll alert to it.
So, we talk about the future of policing, future of different things. So where do you see the future going in the K-9 and the bomb handling? And do you see advances, or is it just an age-old thing that is just there?
I think a lot of that has to do with the agency and the purpose of the dog. I've got two friends of mine that are they're police officers in Iceland. Iceland, their police and military are kind of meshed together. And they're doing some neat stuff with their canines where they're actually tracking and bite dogs as well as odor detection. And they will hover with a drone and they will shoot a laser from a drone and paint a car or a building or a doorway or something like that. And that dog will take off from 100 yards away and go to where that laser is pointing, stuff like that. So I see them implementing a little bit more and more technology. There's some companies that are out there now that, not now, these products have been out for 10 years or greater. Tactical Electronics, they have camera systems that fit on a harness on a dog. And they have little headsets, if you will, little speakers that go into the dog's, right adjacent to the dog's ear. And they can send a dog in to search and look, and they can see what the dog is doing via the camera and then give the dog instructions left, right, or straight with beeps in their ear. Stuff like that. So the technology is there to do a lot of that stuff, but the training, teaching the dog to obey those commands, things like that. That's where it's, really intensive. I think there'll always be canines. I think there'll always be canine programs, even as sophisticated as our test equipment. I've got, test equipment that I carry where I can swab a surface and I can tell you whether there's explosive residue on that surface. Canine can do it a whole lot faster. For example, when they had the shoe bomber, Richard Reed, had his peroxide-based explosive in his shoe. The reason why the airlines freaked out and panicked is because we didn't have detection equipment at the airports that could detect this. That's why everybody was, the quantities of shampoo you could carry were so small, things like that. They didn't want you to carry, full-size peroxide-based explosives on board an airplane. So the canines were actually imprinted on peroxide-based explosives, TATP, HMTD, those things. And so the dogs could detect it, and the dogs can search a lot. They can search luggage, they can search people. So the dogs, being able to train them were, 10 years in front of our technology. We have the sophistication now to do it. Just can't do it as cost efficient or as search efficient as a canine can.
Well, Joe, that's about wrapping up the time that we have. So, I certainly appreciate all the knowledge that you always bring here and talking to us about this specific discipline that we don't get to always see. It's always sort of before events happen, sort of behind the scenes. That's the purpose behind it. It's an event goes on and doesn't really see all the things that we do during that. But again, thank you so much for giving us that information. If there's a topic that you'd like us to cover in future shows, if you'd like to be a guest or you'd like to sponsor the show, reach out to me at dan@crimescenetoday.com. Look forward to seeing you next week.